So California are up to their old California tricks, this time calling for a constitutional convention to create, draft, and ratify the 28th Amendment to effectively end the Second Amendment. Here's the big thing, though. You won't believe the insane lies that they are putting into writing that we will be reviewing here today to sucker low information voters into thinking that the evidence is actually on their side. Now, as a note, we did a complete video breaking down how the 28th Amendment will almost certainly not be passed. That's linked in the description box below. But we see so many recycled, just garbage BS, anti-gun, anti-victim, anti-self-defense tropes getting trotted out all in one spot. It's actually kind of fun to see it all in one spot like this. Usually someone only has the cojones to do one or two, but they put a lot all in one spot, including just some very easy ones that are 100% factually wrong. So get in the car, bucko. We're going to bash the anti-self-defense arguments in this video. Let's get into it. So you can find the draft proposal calling for the Constitutional Convention linked in the description box below. What you're going to hear me reading from are a couple of the whereas provisions. So in other words, they go whereas, and then they recite some sort of inane statistic, at least what they're purporting to be a statistic. And then they go whereas, and they recite another argument or statistics, whereas, and they do that a bunch of times. And then they're like, we need to pass the 20th Amendment. So I want to go through some of the big whereases here today. And again, the link is in the description box below. The first one, whereas approximately 49,000 Americans died in 2021 as a result of gun violence, and firearms are the leading cause of death for children under 18 years of age in the United States, and the most common method of both homicide and suicide. All right. Handful of things to unpack there. There's fundamentally two claims made here that I want to examine. The first one is that 49,000 Americans died from gun violence. Now, this is extraordinarily misleading as far as how they decided to phrase it, almost like they did this on purpose. And when I say they, I mean anti-gun, anti-self-defense folks, because if you're opposing the most common and best tool for self-defense, then that makes you anti-self-defense. First, just as a matter of clarification, about 20,000 people or so are murdered each year by a firearm. So what they're doing here is that they're trying to balance this out by throwing in all sorts of suicides in this mix in order to push the number up above 40,000. To be clear, this is not to dismiss or downplay suicides. I think that's what they are doing. Why? Because by putting this all to make it look like it's the exact same problem, you're never going to be able to actually solve the problem. Suicides and homicides are not the same issue. And if you're going to try to treat them as the same, you're not doing anyone any favors. I will not be holding my breath, by the way, to see this proposed amendment acknowledge the between 500,000 to 3 million American lives that are saved and protected each year according to the defensive use of firearms as observed in a Center for Disease Control CDC study, as well as numerous other studies cited too in there. We also did a video on that. Remember, at the end of the day, a firearm is just a tool and it lacks any moral center or purpose. The moral utility of that firearm or tool is, of course, entirely taken by the person wielding it, not by the device itself. Second claim made in this first whereas, firearms are the leading cause of death for children under the age of 18 years of age. Now, they're very explicit. They said children under the age of 18. This is simply a bold-faced lie and completely untrue. We did an entire video debunking this claim, but here are the super quick fast hits. This claim is based on a University of Michigan study from a few years ago that described both children and adults under the age of 20. So for starters, unless your definition of children under the age of 18, like they define in this whereas section, includes, adults age 18 to 19, then we are not talking about children. And this is a highly relevant point, since of the approximately 4,357 deaths noted in that Michigan study, almost half are from 18 to 19-year-olds, and the vast majority are not from youths below the age of 14. How big is the vast majority? Well, the actual number of children killed by guns each year is about 88 to 110. And by the way, that's from a study that samples almost exclusively on the anti-gun side of the aisle. So that study acknowledged that their reports are about 80% higher than other numbers that have been out there in the past. Again, 88 to 110 under the age of 14. While any child death is an absolute tragedy, I will believe that these anti-gun activists are genuine in their pure intent to protect children's lives after they have banned a much higher threat to children, backyard pools and spas, that between 2017 and 2019 averaged about 389 deaths of children under the age of 15, with the majority of those being under the age of 5, making pools about 350% more deadly than all of the firearms combined in the entire United States. So let's talk about common sense pool control before gun control, if this is actually about protecting children and not about using children to advance an ideological agenda bereft of logic or evidence. Number 2, whereas it is estimated that there are approximately 393 million firearms in civilian hands in the United States as of 2023, meaning that firearms now outnumber people in our country. Okay, and just by the way, since we're all kind of naming useless and pointless statistics, there's about 1.13 billion websites in the world, with a new one being created approximately every 3 seconds. There's another pointless statistic for you. And of course, this is being cited for a reason. This pointless statistic is being cited to imply that we have too many firearms. This statistic also utterly ignores the fact that, once again, guns do not cause deaths. If they did, we would see a strong correlation between crime and the amount of guns in a country, but we don't. The most unsafe countries in the world have among the fewest amounts of firearms, while many of the safest countries in the world have among the highest rates of firearm ownership in the civilian population. The same thing is true if we look at the United States. Per capita, we have a far higher rate of firearm ownership in farm country and small towns than we do in major urban metropolitan areas. Where do you think, on a per capita basis, is the safer place to be? Don't get angry at me. Those are the FBI statistics. And don't confuse what I'm saying for a moment. I'm 0% grinding a political axe or trying to make any kind of subtle point. I'm simply saying that if guns caused the crime, if guns caused the problems, then more guns should mean more problems. But we don't see that almost anywhere. It's not the guns, it's the people who use them. Number 3, whereas gun safety laws are proven to lessen the scourge of gun violence, as evidenced by the fact that since some of California's most significant gun safety laws took place in the early 1990s, California has cut its rate of gun deaths in half, and the state's gun death rate is 39% lower than the national average as of 2023. End quote. This is a super cherry-picked statistic, and let's just unpack it for a moment here. Now, the 1990s were some of the most violent times in American history when we're talking about crime. This also, of course, by the way, happened while the so-called federal assault weapons ban was in place, as well as tons of other states, municipalities that had gun control in place, including a near blanket ban on firearm possession in various major metropolitan cities, such as Chicago, DC, and elsewhere. If gun control worked, why did the crime rate continue to rise across the 80s and 90s when all this gun control was in place? The anti-self-defense advocates would instead claim that the problem was then, as now, that guns come from other jurisdictions that lack the necessary gun control to flood into the urban utopias that otherwise would not have these issues. Aside from ignoring an overwhelming amount of evidence and statistics that I've covered both on this channel as well as in other videos, it also ignores a very simple logical argument that I've already given to you once here before. If guns cause the problems, then why wouldn't the areas with the highest amounts of gun ownership rates, again, like rural farm country, be the most dangerous? Wouldn't the places where those guns are coming from and supposedly flooding to the worst areas, wouldn't those places, the points of origin, be the worst areas in and of themselves? But of course, the people who wrote this can't actually come up and point to a specific study that said this particular piece of legislation had this particular effect. If they could, don't you think they would do that? Instead, they're basically picking apart certain eras, a high crime era, and saying, look, this high crime era produced these laws and now these laws came down. All right, guys, before we go any further, I just want to take a moment. If you've enjoyed this video, please be sure to hit that like button. Of course, subscribe to make sure you don't miss any future content. We also have a join membership option to get some extra exclusives. We're going to be doing some exclusive membership live streams. Allow me to talk to some of you folks. And of course, we're going to close this video on our ever popular quote of the day coming up. Now, the rest of the whereases and so forth, they're all linked in the description box below and is basically complaining about the Supreme Court's 2022 Bruin decision and claiming that the founding fathers would not have predicted the march of technology and industry in making firearms more dangerous and presumably, therefore, never would have accepted that the right would extend to modern day weapons if only they knew how dangerous they would be. Never mind that if we repurpose those exact same words and same logic to other rights, it sounds something like this. The founding fathers never could have imagined something like the internet, cell phones, computers, let alone automobiles and so forth. Therefore, no free speech and protection against unreasonable searches and seizures should likewise be applied to these sorts of devices and places. Right? Do you see how silly that sounds? Look, if you want to save lives, stop lying and making up statistics. Start learning your statistics and history. If you want to save children's lives right now, close and fill in every backyard pool in America. If you want to save children's lives in the future, when they grow up, teach them about financial literacy and nutrition. If you don't have the integrity to close backyard pools, those backyard pools that are 350% more dangerous than firearms, then at least admit that this is not about saving children's lives. This is about disarming victims. Our quote of the day comes from C.S. Lewis. Hardships often prepare ordinary people for an extraordinary destiny. Thanks for sticking around. I look forward to seeing you all in the comment section as well as the next video. Take care. Thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this one, please feel free to check out some of our other great content, and we'll see you in the next one.